Hey, good morning, everyone. Scott's in Toronto, along with Ife Zhao. Good morning, Ife.
Morning, Scott.
And all the way over in France, Bruce Crumley. Good afternoon, Bruce.
Hello there.
So Ishvina could not join us today, but that doesn't mean we can't go ahead with our panel. And so there's lots of news that's been happening. And one of the most bizarre pieces of news that I've seen in quite some time, which does raise a number of issues. And this is a story about sort of wildlife harassment, technological ignorance, and a bundle of other things. Bruce, you covered the story. Just tell us what happened so anyone joining us is refreshed and up to speed.
Yeah, as I said in the story, that this kind of covers several time zones of stupidity and thoughtlessness in a single move. Essentially, what we know about it is that a group of tourists were out visiting Florida, and they were out in the Everglades, and they saw an alligator, and they decided to try to get a shot of it with, quote, its mouth open, and so then flew this drone right over the head of this wild animal, which A, is animal harassment. I'm sorry, by any definition. B, is just not a really good idea anyway. And C, left the drone open for, in fact, what indeed happened is that is the alligator saying, "Okay, I'm tired of this," and snapping it out of the air. And then the following scenes are apparently these were 3 different videos that were spliced together because I guess the capacity of the phone or whatever that took it wasn't able to do any better than that. But I saw the finished version, which apparently was edited. Did not have all the comments, but it's just as well because the final version irritated everybody enough. But essentially, these people were kind of enthusing at this, amazed that the drone had gotten snapped out of the air, and then were kind of fake bemoaning this alligator chewing on it as the inside started smoking and fuming in its mouth. And it's when you realize that first of all, the rotors work when he gnawed on it, but also when something's smoking in a live animal's mouth, it's not very good time. And these people getting great amusement from it. It's really kind of disturbing, the callousness and thoughtlessness of people. And the other thing about it was that in a caption that was burned in, they explained that it was only the second time they'd flown the drone, and they thought, quote, the obstacle avoidance would sweep it out of harm's way should the alligator react. So it's kind of, as I say, a real Homer Simpson behind the controller moment.
Yeah, I was astonished when I saw the video. Ife, I'm guessing you've seen the video by now as well. A, what were your thoughts when you saw it? And B, why don't you explain what we were seeing when those clouds of smoke were coming out from the animal's mouth?
Well, so first of all, people do stupid things. It's unfortunate it's with a drone, especially as we know, the drone batteries, LiPo batteries are rated dangerous goods, so they can burn really hot, obviously depending on the actual capacity of the LiPo that's left, but they can burn really hot. They can melt through metal, so it's definitely not good for any wildlife. And I just feel like people who do things like this, if it wasn't drone, it would have been something else, right? Nothing is gonna stop them from acting stupid. It's just such a shame. And the fact they would fly so close and they would put it on, the obstacle avoidance would have done something, but the obstacle avoidance has many of its limitations. It's not meant to work on any live animal to begin with. And as Bruce mentioned, it's their second flight, so I don't know what made them so confident to fly so close to living creatures when it's just their second flight. So those are basically my takes. Like I said, people do stupid things, and it's a shame that it's with a drone. But like I said, I think it will be any other gadget that can get them to do something stupid.
And then on top of it, just to finish off, sorry, just to add the last time zone of stupidity is, and then you upload it for the entire world to see. I mean, as in my comment, it's like a pickpocket uploading, selfies of him or herself, lightening people's pockets. It's like, at what point did the process of actually using your mind just completely leave your daily agenda. It was really quite incredible.
Common sense is for those who have it, right?
Well, I rewatched the video just shortly before the panel, and one of the telling comments comes right at the end that is captured on the phone recording, where they say, "Better get out of here." So they clearly knew, this was a bad thing that had happened, and that they might be liable for some sort of punitive measures, and thought, let's just leave. And I think two things are harmed in this case. I think clearly that alligator was harmed. If you've got a lipo burning inside your mouth, there's no doubt, no matter what kind of creature you are, unless you're from another planet, that this is going to cause some serious injury to the animal itself. But I think beyond that as well, this causes harm to the practice of flying drones. And videos like this do no good for the vast bulk of pilots who are responsible, who obey the rules, and would never take a drone on their second flight, or even their 10th flight, or even their 100th flight, unless they were a wildlife photographer working under strict parameters, around creature safety or wildlife protection. So what are your thoughts, Ife, on the kind of message that this sends to the average person who doesn't know much about the drone community, and they see a video like this online?
I'm hoping that they does more educational purpose, right, than giving them more stupid ideas. And I guess for people who just want to get wildlife photography, put a GoPro on a stick, on a selfie stick, right, and you can get some really nice videos or photos. Don't fly the drone close to anything or anyone. That would be my general advice.
And the other thing about this is that I think it's just part and parcel of the world we live in anymore, where everything is so divided, and everything becomes a point of great debate, heated debate. And so I think some people, when they see these kind of things, and see our kind of the reactions we have, it's kind of tend to some people are inclined to think, oh, they're having a go at the drones again. It almost gets to be something a little bit like the gun debate, where they're going at the drones. How come it's just one person doing something stupid, and how do you have to get all tree huggy about an alligator and all this? And I don't think that anybody is thinking that. That's certainly not my own intent. It's just there's nothing wrong with drones. Drones are great, wonderful, and for all the reasons that we and people watching us like them. The idea is that they do unfortunately cause some problems, and we have to keep those in mind, including problems that may be in the sensibilities of other people. If you fly a drone around a live animal, even if it's a domesticated animal, and the thing freaks out, people are going to say that's abuse. It may or may not be, but the problem is not necessarily in the intent. It's just in the fact that the drones do have certain consequences, effects on animals, and we have to keep that in mind. We can't just say stop being a tree hugger.
Now, unless I'm mistaken, when I saw the video as it was uploaded to YouTube, it appeared to be uploaded by one of these sites that aggregates videos and tries to push viral videos. So we don't actually see the identity of the person who made the video, although hopefully that will be discovered. I think one of the downsides here is that because that video in its own way is so unusual. I mean, to me, it's horrifying, but it is so unusual. It's the kind of thing where people go, hey, have you seen this video? And the fact that it's being distributed on a channel that is intended to be a viral channel means that there are going to be quite a few views of it. A lot of people, as we've discussed, who's
profiting from it. Someone
is profiting from it. And that is really kind of the issue that concerns me. And you almost wonder, I mean, I don't want to be, the drone police, but you almost wonder if some of the social media platforms, when there is something like this that is so clearly wrong, that maybe they should be, have some way that they can be flagged and say, look, you should not really be allowing someone to monetize this kind of video.
Yeah, you shouldn't make money on wrongdoing.
No, I don't think so. And I see we've got, some folks who are watching live at the moment. Thank you for joining us on a Thursday morning. But certainly, if you have any thoughts, if you've seen the alligator video specifically that we're talking about, and if you have any thoughts about drones and wildlife and how we kind of handle this, we'd be happy to see any comments and potentially answer some questions. But yeah, really kind of a tragic story, and one that just left me and I think the rest of us sort of shaking our heads and thinking, what were they thinking? And hopefully it won't lead to others. I mean, the one thing that is positive is that in the early days of drones, we saw this more often, not exploding lipos in alligators' mouths, but we saw a lot of people who would use drones like on wildlife preserves and go off and try and get as close as they could to lions or other wild animals. And sometimes intentionally trying to provoke a response in the hope that it would create a better video. And I think, Aoife, you would probably agree, because you've been watching these kinds of videos for a number of years, that at least that seems to have diminished. Would you agree in general?
The numbers definitely been reducing substantially, which is helpful, and also comparing to, I guess it's also the technology improvement. I remember 10 years ago when we just started flying drones, the GPS was so terrible, the flight controller was so terrible, the drones couldn't hold position, right? Versus now, drones can actually hold position while you're still figuring out the controls. So I think the technology's improvement is also helping.
And I mean, I get it. I can understand if you're operating a drone and you're at a park where, there are alligators, or you're in the Everglades, that it could be really, really tempting, right? Hey, let's see if we can get an amazing shot of the alligator. I totally get it. But use common sense, and if you really, for whatever reason, you just cannot help yourself but to put that drone in the air, keep a reasonable distance, stay back 10, 20 meters from the creature. Don't go flying up in its face, regardless of what the animal is. I'm sure for some people, they might think, oh, well, an alligator is kind of a tough sort of creature. It's not going to bother it. But clearly it did. And clearly there were, implications for the creature. So we'll leave that topic, but move on to another one, which is also very controversial. Within the past week, we've had two different stories, very, very different versions of what happened with an Embraer 175 passenger aircraft that was on departure from O'Hare Airport in Chicago. And at the height of 12,000 feet, I believe, the pilot radioed, I believe we hit a drone, and requested that they be allowed to burn off some fuel or use up some fuel and then return and land, which is what they did. Bruce, you reported on this initially. Tell us what the FAA said at the time.
Well, they just were quoted on a special website, air traffic website, as saying that the flight Envoy flight, whatever it was, I don't remember, had collided with a drone. And it was one line, literally one line. And in the heat of the action, this just happened. Of course, the FAA is going to go on what it has and what it's been told, and it reported it, or came up with the conclusion that made sense at the time. Since then, it has gone back and said no. In fact, it wasn't a drone. It was a Mylar balloon. It's, one of those kind of party balloons that are so popular with kids these days, and not just kids. But anyway, so that's what the official ruling has been. And what caught my eye is, and this is it's kind of a dual story, because first of all, the reactions of certain outlets that covered this secondary, this revised version, were kind of vehement, kind of like, we knew that first wave of media hype was wrong and high, and out of order, and we just waited, and then we were proven right because it turned out to be a balloon, not a drone, which is true, but I don't think they did particularly service to journalism by not saying anything the first time around. What journalists do is the same thing the FAA does in this case, and you go with what information you have, and you go with the most reliable information you have. And if there's any doubt, you work in conditionals, as we did. And if it turns out that the prevailing thesis at the beginning was wrong, then you go back and you correct it. That's the big deal. I'm just not quite sure, and obviously I don't have enough experience in the drone world as both of you do. But why the issue, as we saw with a comment last week, why the issue of a drone of an aircraft possibly colliding with a drone becomes so sectarian immediately? Again, it's like the gun debate. You're either on one side or the other. There's no sitting on the fence, and I kind of just don't even understand the passion in this entrenched positions. It just seems to me it happens sometimes. Thank goodness, very rarely, but when there questions arise, it's in everybody's interest to take a look. Go with what you know. Don't make any declarative statements that you don't know, but go with it. You can't just ignore it because drones have get dumped on all the time. It's just I don't understand that, basically.
Ife, what was your take in following this story and seeing the two versions that showed up in roughly a week?
I'm really interested in knowing what made the pilot think that it was a drone. Because I remember seeing similar stories over the past few years, and there were a lot of, especially in actual drone groups, right? If you see the stories being shared in actual drone groups. I remember one of the popular comments was saying, and this was a couple of years ago, it was saying that back then it was a plain similar situation. I mean, if you're looking at an actual passenger airplane traveling at tens of thousands of feet in the air and looking at the speed it was going at, how would they know that it was a drone, not a bird, not a balloon, not anything else? So that was really the question. As Bruce mentioned, that FAA went with whatever information they were given at the time, which sounds like mostly was from the pilot. So I guess the question is from general aviation, from these passenger airplanes, why would the pilots by default, to think that it's a drone? So that would be my question to the pilot. And then going back to Bruce's question about people's reaction, I feel like to a certain point, the reaction is also caused by civil aviation, the civil aviation agencies raising safety questions. Because the first question I got from here from Transport Canada years ago when we started was, what do you do instead of a drone crashing? Now it's flying away. It's just going straight up. And that was something I didn't think about at the time, right? I thought, the worst case scenario would be my large filming drone crashing onto the head of, a multi-million-dollar actor, and that would be the end of my career. But I never thought about, back then, a really large drone with 12,000 milliamps of battery and, hitting with a plane and catch fire on impact and bring the plane down. So I guess for the industry, that was always the worst case scenario. That was always the nightmare that no one wants to see. So I guess anytime when we hear there's a drone colliding with a plane, the question is always, what happened? Did the battery go into the engine? Did it explode? Did it actually bring the plane down? Just because in our heads that image was already imprinted by the Civil Aviation Agency, is that's your worst case scenario. That's always the scenario you want to avoid. But now, so many years into the industry, I'm also interested in knowing what are the general stats of birds hitting planes, right? Of weather balloons, of different objects in the air hitting planes. How often does that happen? And how often has it happened with the drone? Because to my knowledge, so far there's only been just the one that's actually confirmed. And I believe we talked about that last week, right, with the York Regional Police. So I love to see numbers. Otherwise, we're just speculating.
Now, I know, are, take regulations very, very seriously and know them inside out. Just for our viewers in Canada, or for people watching the replay in Canada, you mentioned a flyaway, which thankfully is very rare these days because the C2 link seems to be very solid and there are all sorts of redundancy backups. But what is the protocol? What should a pilot do if suddenly they've lost control and their drone is heading away?
So it depends on, is it going vertical away or is it going horizontally away? So typically is flight planning. That's why flight planning is important. So you would know who is your nearest airport, and you would know who is your airspace controlling agency if you're in controlled airspace or really busy airspace. And what you would do is you would want to call that emergency number. and you would want to let them know that your drone has flown away, what is its last known coordinates, what is speed, what battery percentage has been left, and basically if it's going vertical away with that information, they would have a general idea of how high it's going to go. Right. And really, from controlling agency perspective, they can see the planes on radar. They can see the planes that may be affected in the area, and they can choose to relay that message to the related parties versus, a controlled airspace can be 6-10 nautical miles in radius. So they definitely don't want to spook all the planes in that area who are not affected. So talking to the controlling agency or the airport and relay the necessary information to the affected airplanes and evacuate them for any potential impact. So that's basically your standard emergency procedure for flyaway.
I guess one of the things that strikes me on this story, and Bruce, you touched on it, is that, organizations that report on these events, we rely on the information we have available at the time. So if the FAA is saying on that day that there appears to have been a near miss with a drone, that's what we're going to report at the time. Then, of course, the regulatory agency changed its tune. And to me, on the one hand, you kind of think, okay, whether you're the FAA or Transport Canada or NAV Canada or some other agency, it would seem to me that it should be a little incumbent upon you to make sure that you have the facts correct. To put in a qualifier, for example, the pilot reports that they saw a drone. We have not been able to confirm that it was, in fact, a UAS. Just to put some sort of seed of doubt until an investigation has been carried out. That might be something helpful. I don't think there's an option of just saying nothing, because these days, so many people are monitoring, with the internet, you can listen to air traffic. So that conversation between the pilot saying, I believe we've just, what were his words? I believe we hit a drone. And the FAA at the time said struck a UAS. It would seem that, that at least the air traffic comments, someone's going to pick up on that and realize that this aircraft turned around and landed. So it's going to get out there. The information is going to get out there. I guess the other final thing I want to touch on this topic before we move on is just that, sometimes these sightings occur at very unrealistic altitudes, like the height that a jet is flying at, 35,000 feet. And really, there is no consumer drone that's going to reach that height. But I have seen cases where there are reports of drones at, say, 8,000 feet, even 12,000 feet. And I've seen manufacturers and representatives of manufacturers hop on social media and say, 12,000 feet, that's impossible. That cannot happen. Well, I can point you to a video on YouTube of a DJI flame wheel that reaches about 12,000 feet and is above the clouds. So yes, there are geofences on many of the products that would prohibit, this kind of flight, but it can be done. And some of these do have the energy capacity to reach those heights. So it's not impossible, to dismiss something out of hand based on altitude, unless really it's like 20, 30,000 feet, is also kind of irresponsible until we actually know the facts. Any thoughts on that, Ife?
Definitely. I mean, from capabilities perspective, I always like to look at the range rating, right? To look at the range rating between the controller and the drone. And it makes you wonder that why would it list it, 5, 7 kilometers or 10 kilometers of range when, you shouldn't actually be flying that far. And that's the same thing with altitude capabilities. Because if you look at a car driving, listing at top speed of 260, 240, you would think, well, am I going to drive that fast? But if you compare the 5 kilometers range versus, I say 120 meters you're supposed to fly at, that's a substantial difference.
Right. Well, the last story, and it's just, we don't really have much of an update, but it's worth touching on again because it was such a big story here in Canada and certainly has been watched with interest by people in the drone and aerospace industry around the world. And that is the collision of a drone operated by York Regional Police in Ontario with a Cessna that was on approach to an airport not far from Ife's Altex
Across the street,
Technologies
actually.
office. Ife, do you want to just remind us what you recall of the incident and the damage that was shown in the photographs?
So from what I recall, was the Cessna was on its was basically on its way to land. So it was on arrival. When they felt, I believe it was the pilot and the passenger felt there was a really big movement, and they could feel it from their seats. And then after the plane had landed, that's when they identified the damage. And they had thought at the time they had hit a bird. But it was later they discovered it was a York Regional Police drone that was operating in the area. I believe the reports say it was around 500 feet above ground level. But really, I mean, 500 feet with margin of error, I mean, that could, because the legal altitude is 400 feet above ground level here without really further approval. So 500 is not really, I mean, I know a lot of people question that, but it's not substantially higher than where they're supposed to fly. I guess the other thing people question was NAV Canada came out and said they had no record of this flight being approved because this is in controlled airspace. So any drone flies in controlled airspace supposed to have approval from NAV Canada. So I guess that's the part where everyone is waiting on. Is, you know, we understand that people carry out drone operations, and I'm sure the pilots had their licensing and everything. But the bigger question is why this wasn't reported on NAV Canada's drone app. And also just I guess a personal take from my side is, I always said this, you know, if small drones, if a DJI Air 2S can have the AirSense, can have a transponder receiver, then I'd really like to see more from general aviation. I'd like to see the small single engine Cessna planes starting to have transponder receivers, because really just drones having transponder receivers is not doing anything unless all the main aircraft are actually also carrying transponder receivers. And in that case, you know, a situation like this can really be potentially avoided.
One of the things that I have found interesting about this incident, well, I was horrified by the damage because the cowling was really sort of buckled in on that aircraft, and the pilot and student who were in the aircraft both report, you know, kind of being jarred back against their seats when the impact occurred. But I find it unfortunate that we have not yet seen any sort of official release, at least that I have seen, from York Regional Police. You know, this is clearly a serious incident. We understand that, you know, the Transportation Safety Board has to do its own investigation to determine exactly what happened and why. But even during the interim, it would be helpful just to have an admission or a statement of facts, and that includes that York Regional Police will cooperate, of course, fully with the authorities, because I can't help but think if this had been a consumer flying a drone and it had run into a crewed aircraft in an incident like this with damage like this, it's my belief that probably there would have been charges laid already. You know, perhaps they would wait for the investigation to be complete, but it seems to me that you know, that things are a little bit touchy on this one because, you know, it's law enforcement and regulatory agencies, and they all kind of, you
even
know,
just from public relations perspective, you would think they should come out and say something.
You would think so. We invited them to do so last week on Twitter, and I'm going to follow up with an email to York Regional Police this week and see if we can get some sort of further information. Well, as always, Bruce, did you have something? Looked like you wanted to pop in.
I just going to say one last thing. This is kind of though reflective of our times, and as I said, this is not just with drones; it's also with journalism. It's also with the impact of the absolutely horrific reality TV, in which you're actually filming people and turning them into stars for acting like morons, and people being very entertained by that. And for example, the FAA, they made their statement about the Embraer plane, then they didn't make a statement, as far as I can find, on the fact that it was a Mylar balloon. I looked everywhere. I haven't seen a statement. I saw other media outlets saying, according to the FAA, and I didn't see any links to it. I didn't see any quotes from it. And as a journalist, that makes me immediately very suspicious, because if nobody is coming up with substantiated evidence of this claim, then I'm wondering where it came from. So I emailed the FAA, and they very kindly got back to me very fast, swiftly, with a one sentence response saying it was a Mylar balloon. Where I get back to the York Police Department is that you know what, this era, once any information is out there, you kind of have to keep going, because if you don't, you leave this huge gap for speculation, and people will speculate all over the place, and they'll speculate per their ideological views, per their religious views, per their hobbying preferences and what have you. And you cannot afford to say nothing when a little bit is out there. A little bit of information is always being dangerous. You have to kind of come clean as much as you can. I'd personally love to know how the FAA, just from curiosity point of view, how they knew it was a balloon. Did they have external images from the plane that saw it, picked it up, said, "Oh, that was a balloon"? Were part of the Mylar still attached to the craft? I'd love to know, but I don't see how it serves anybody's interest to withhold information to the vast minimum. Unless there's something really bad going on, and I don't think that's the case in the FAA, and it probably isn't the case with the York Police. It's probably more of a thing is people realize it looks really bad already. We've got information that's is coming out, and it's hard to control, and so let's just try to tie it off here and hope it dies down. And that usually doesn't work very well anymore.
Yeah, despite my earlier comment that perhaps the FAA should have been a little more cautious in its initial appraisal of the incident, I do want to say that the FAA, as Bruce noted, their public affairs office is really great. They get back to us almost immediately, like it's generally within an hour or two of any request. So I do have to give the FAA a shout out there. They are generally quite transparent, and they're very, very helpful when there are questions that we have for them. Well, once again, another panel goes by like that. Ife Zhao, thank you so much for joining us again. Ife is a regular panelist and a contributor to Drone DJ, and she runs a company, Alltex Technologies, which does everything from training to consulting to everything else. But Ife is a true pro who really, really understands this industry, and I would personally regard as one of the most knowledgeable people in Canada on these matters. And Bruce Crumley, senior editor with Drone DJ, the guy who reported on the Alligator, reported on the Embraer, and provides us with a great selection of interesting and thoughtful stories on Drone DJ. I'm Scott Simmy, and that's a wrap for this week. So we're going to end the broadcast. If you're watching on replay, we hope you'll enjoy it. And although I don't generally say this, I know it's a thing you're supposed to say on YouTube all the time. If you enjoyed this, please do give us a thumbs up. If you join us next time, feel free to drop in with a comment or question. And if you're not subscribed to our channel, please do. This panel generally occurs on Wednesdays. We had a little bit of a bump this week, so we wound up on Thursday. Thank you both, and have a good week, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.